When I discovered my husband's affair, he told me I'd never leave because I needed him too much. I didn't argue. I just waited until the perfect moment to let his confidence destroy him. My name is Jennifer Brown, I'm 33, and this happened between Nashville and Dallas. My husband Michael and I had been married 8 years. We owned a modest house outside Nashville. I worked as a designer for a small marketing firm. Michael's job was different. He worked as a manager for a large distribution company based in Dallas. Most of the corporate team operated there, and Michael traveled back and forth several times a month. At least, that's what he told me. Back then, I believed him without question. Michael had always been the more ambitious one in our relationship. He liked talking about promotions, strategy meetings, leadership conferences. I honestly admired that about him. Sometimes he'd sit at the kitchen table late at night with his laptop open, talking about the office. "That place is ruthless," he'd say. "Everyone's trying to climb over each other." I'd laugh and tell him that's why I stayed in marketing instead of corporate management. For a long time, nothing about our life felt suspicious. We had routines. Friday nights meant takeout and a movie. Sundays we grocery shopped together and argued about which brand of pasta sauce to buy. It was boring in the way that married life often is. And I liked it that way. The changes started slowly. At first it was just longer workdays. Michael would call around 6 in the evening. "Hey, I'm stuck in meetings again," he'd say. "Might be late tonight." I didn't question it. His job had always been demanding. But then it became more frequent. Late meetings. Last-minute trips to Dallas. Weekend strategy sessions. One night I remember asking casually, "Do they ever let you breathe over there?" Michael laughed while loosening his tie. "Not if you want to move up." At the time, that answer made sense. Looking back, it was probably the beginning of everything. The next change was smaller, but stranger. Michael suddenly cared a lot more about how he looked. New shirts. Expensive cologne. Gym visits late at night. At first, I teased him about it. One evening, I watched him carefully styling his hair in the bathroom mirror. "Since when are you this invested in your haircut?" I asked. He smirked at me through the mirror. "What, I can't look good for my wife?" Maybe I should have pushed harder right then. But when someone you trust gives you a simple explanation, you tend to accept it. Life kept moving. Work, dinners, errands. Months passed like that. Then one night, everything shifted. Michael came home late from a company gathering in Dallas. He'd clearly been drinking. I could smell the whiskey the moment he stepped inside. He dropped his jacket over the back of a chair and walked straight into the kitchen. "You still up?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. I was finishing a project. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. For a few minutes, we just talked about normal things: my work, the neighbor's new dog, some TV show we'd been watching. Then he started laughing about something. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, still smiling. "Tell me." He shook his head. "It's just, there's this woman at work. She's obsessed with me." I thought he was joking. "What do you mean obsessed?" He shrugged casually. "She's always around. Flirting, touching my arm, all that stuff." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. "Are you serious?" Michael took a sip of water and grinned. "Relax. It's harmless." I remember standing there in the kitchen, trying to read his expression. "You're not encouraging it, right?" He rolled his eyes. "Jennifer, come on." Then he said something that stayed in my head long after that night. "Half the guys in the office have someone like that. It's not a big deal." The way he said it, like it was normal. Like it was expected. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. But something inside me went cold. The next morning, Michael acted like the conversation had never happened. While we were drinking coffee, I brought it up again. "You remember what you said last night?" He looked confused. "About what?" "The woman from your office." Michael frowned. "You must have misunderstood something." I was joking. I stared at him. "You didn't sound like you were joking." He sighed like I was being difficult. "Jen, you're overthinking this." That was the first time I felt it. That quiet, uncomfortable feeling in my chest. Doubt. Once it appeared, I couldn't ignore it anymore. After that, I started noticing things. Michael kept his phone face down on tables. He stepped outside to take calls. Sometimes when a message arrived, he'd glance at the screen and immediately lock it. None of it was proof. But it was enough to make me watch more carefully. About a month later, I got the answer I'd been dreading. It happened on a quiet Thursday night. Michael had come home late again and fallen asleep on the couch while watching television. The room was dark except for the flickering light from the screen. I was in the kitchen when I heard the soft buzz of his phone on the coffee table. I wasn't planning to check it. Honestly, I wasn't even thinking about it. But when I walked past the couch, the screen lit up. A message preview appeared. And I saw the name. Ashley Martin. There was a small heart emoji beside it. The message underneath read, "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." I stood there for a long time staring at the screen. Michael was still asleep. The television flickered quietly across the room. And for the first time, The suspicion in my head turned into something solid. Something real. Slowly, I picked up the phone. And that was the moment my entire marriage finally started to fall apart. I stood there in the dim living room, holding Michael's phone like it suddenly weighed 10 pounds. He was still asleep on the couch, one arm hanging off the side, the television casting blue light across his face. Completely relaxed. Completely unaware that his entire secret was about to unravel. For a second, I considered putting the phone back down, pretending I hadn't seen the message. But then the screen lit up again. Another text from Ashley Martin. Did she suspect anything when you got home? My chest tightened. That one sentence answered more questions than I even knew how to ask. I unlocked the phone. Michael had never changed his passcode from the same one he'd used for years. My birthday. Back when he apparently still cared about things like that. The message thread opened. At first I just stared. Then I started scrolling. And that's when everything really sank in. The conversation went back months. Not just flirting. Photos. Late-night messages. Hotel confirmations. There were jokes about their coworkers, complaints about meetings, and scattered between all of that were the kind of messages that make your stomach twist when you read them. Things like, "Last night was worth the wait. I wish you didn't have to go back to Nashville." And the one that made my hands start shaking. "Does she really have no idea?" Michael had replied to that one. "Jen barely notices anything." I felt heat rush into my face. Not just anger. Humiliation. Because it wasn't just the cheating. It was the fact that they were talking about me like I was some clueless background character in their lives. I kept scrolling. At one point Ashley had sent a photo of herself in what looked like a hotel room mirror. Michael's reply came seconds later. "Your trouble. Only for you." I dropped onto the edge of the armchair across from the couch. Michael shifted slightly in his sleep, but didn't wake up. I must have spent 20 minutes reading through those messages. The pattern became obvious pretty quickly. Whenever Michael had told me he needed to travel to Dallas, he wasn't staying late at the office. He was staying with her. And it wasn't some recent mistake either. The messages went back almost 8 months. 8 months of lies. 8 months of dinners where he sat across from me acting normal. 8 months of pretending. What made it worse was realizing how comfortable they were with it. There was no secrecy in their tone. No guilt. Just casual confidence. At one point Ashley wrote, "Kevin almost caught us leaving the conference room." Michael responded with a laughing emoji. "Kevin knows. Everyone does." I froze. Everyone. Apparently the entire office knew my husband was cheating on me. Everyone except me. That realization hit harder than the affair itself. Because it meant my marriage had become entertainment for strangers. Eventually I set the phone back on the coffee table. My hands were steady now. The shock had passed. What replaced it was something colder. Michael stirred on the couch and rubbed his eyes. "You still awake?" he mumbled. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said quietly, "Who's Ashley?" He blinked a few times like the question hadn't fully registered. "What?" "Ashley Martin," I said. "Your coworker." The room went very still. Michael sat up slowly. "How do you know that name? You left your phone unlocked." For a few seconds he didn't say anything. Then he exhaled and leaned back against the couch cushions. "Well," he muttered. "I guess that was going to come out eventually." I stared at him. "That's it? That's your reaction?" He rubbed his forehead like this was just an inconvenience. "Jennifer, don't make this bigger than it needs to be." My jaw tightened. "You've been sleeping with her for 8 months. It's not like that." "Oh, really?" I said. Because the messages looked pretty clear. Michael sighed like he was tired of the conversation already. "It's just physical." The words landed in the room like they were nothing. I couldn't believe how casually he said them. "Just physical," I repeated. "Yeah," he said. "It doesn't mean anything." I let out a small laugh that didn't sound like it belonged to me. "You've been lying to me for almost a year." "It's not lying," he said quickly. "It's just separate." Separate. That word stuck in my head. "So your marriage is separate from the person you sleep with behind my back?" "Look, you're getting emotional about this." I stared at him in disbelief. "Of course I'm emotional." Michael shook his head like I was the unreasonable one. "This is exactly why I didn't tell you." There was a long silence after that. I realized something in that moment. Michael wasn't scared. He wasn't even particularly worried. He was annoyed. Like I'd discovered a minor inconvenience instead of the fact that he'd been cheating on his wife for months. I asked the question that had been building in my chest. "Does everyone at your office know?" Michael hesitated. That tiny pause told me everything. "Some people," he admitted. I felt my stomach drop. "So they've all been watching this happen." "Jennifer, it's not a big deal there." "Not a big deal." I stood up slowly. "Do you maybe?" Michael leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "Look, we can work through this." The confidence in his voice was unbelievable. "You're serious?" "Yeah," he said. "Why wouldn't we?" I folded my arms. "You cheated on me." "And?" I blinked. "And?" "It doesn't have to destroy everything," he said. "People move past stuff like this all the time." I studied his face. The calm certainty. The complete lack of guilt. That's when I understood something important. Michael didn't think I was going to leave. Not even for a second. And he confirmed it a moment later. He leaned back and gave a small shrug. What are you going to do, Jen? Divorce me? I didn't answer. He gave a short laugh. Good luck affording the house without me. The arrogance in his voice was almost impressive. Michael earned more than I did. Not drastically more, but enough that he clearly believed it gave him power. He thought I needed him. That I'd accept anything rather than start over. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said quietly, "You really think I'd stay after this?" He met my eyes calmly. "Yeah," he said. That moment changed everything. Because I realized something very simple. Michael believed he had already won. And from that point forward, I stopped trying to convince him otherwise. Instead, I started paying attention. Because if there was one thing my husband loved more than his ego, it was his career in Dallas. And he had no idea how fragile that career actually was. After that night, something in our house changed. Not dramatically. Not with yelling or slammed doors. It was quieter than that. Michael and I stopped pretending things were normal. We lived in the same house in Nashville, but it felt like we were just two people sharing space. He still traveled to Dallas for work. Still took late calls. Still kept his phone close. But now he didn't bother hiding it as much. One night while we were eating dinner, he casually mentioned Ashley. Not even carefully. Just like she was another coworker. "Ashley handled the client presentation today," he said while scrolling his phone. I looked at him across the table. "You're talking about the woman you're sleeping with." He barely reacted. "She's still my coworker." That was the moment I understood something important about Michael. He wasn't worried. Not about losing me. Not about consequences. He thought this situation was already settled. And, honestly, part of me understood why. He had the higher salary. Most of his career connections were in Dallas. Our house, at least in his mind, depended on his income. From his perspective, the power balance was obvious. What he didn't know was that I had started quietly checking things. Mortgage documents. Bank statements. Loan paperwork. I didn't tell him I was doing it. I just wanted to understand where I actually stood. The answer surprised me, but I kept that information to myself. Meanwhile, Michael continued living his life like nothing serious had happened. About 3 weeks after the confrontation, he mentioned a company event. "There's a networking reception in Dallas next month," he said one evening. I looked up from my laptop. "And? Spouses are invited." I raised an eyebrow. "You want me to come?" Michael shrugged. "Why not? Everyone else brings their partners." I almost laughed at that. Everyone else. The same people who apparently knew about his affair. But instead I said, "Sure." For the first time in weeks, Michael actually looked relieved. I don't think he expected me to agree. A month later, we flew to Dallas together. The event was being held in a large hotel ballroom downtown. When we arrived, the place was already crowded with people in suits holding drinks and making small talk. Michael seemed completely comfortable there. He moved easily through the room, greeting coworkers, shaking hands, introducing me to people. "This is my wife, Jennifer." Every time he said that, I wondered how many of those people already knew about Ashley. Some smiled politely. Some looked slightly awkward. One guy, Kevin Allen, a clerk from his department, barely made eye contact with me at all. That told me enough. At some point, Michael left to grab another drink, leaving me standing near one of the tall tables. That's when a man approached me. He looked to be in his mid-50s, wearing a dark suit and a calm expression. "You must be Jennifer," he said. I nodded. "And you are?" "Robert Taylor." The name clicked immediately. Michael talked about him all the time. His boss. The regional manager who controlled promotions and major projects. Robert extended his hand and smiled politely. "Michael speaks highly of you." I shook his hand. "That's surprising." He chuckled softly. For the next few minutes, we talked about normal things. Work. Travel. Life in Nashville. Robert was easy to talk to in a way that felt unexpected for someone in his position. While we were talking, Michael walked past with a woman beside him. Ashley Martin. I recognized her immediately from the photos on Michael's phone. Tall, confident, perfectly styled. She said something to Michael and lightly touched his arm while laughing. They didn't notice me watching. But Robert did. I saw his eyes shift slightly in their direction. He didn't say anything. Not then. But I could tell he noticed the interaction. After a moment, he looked back at me. "Your husband seems very popular in the office," he said casually. There was something in his tone. Not judgment. Observation. I shrugged lightly. "So I've heard." We continued talking for a few more minutes before Michael returned. "Jennifer, you met Robert," he said, slightly surprised. "Just now," I replied. Michael seemed suddenly more alert. Like he hadn't expected that conversation to happen. Robert gave him a polite nod. "Your wife was telling me about Nashville." Michael smiled quickly. "Yeah, she loves it there." But I could feel the subtle tension in his posture. like he didn't want this interaction lasting too long. Eventually, Robert excused himself and moved across the room. Michael leaned closer to me. What did you two talk about? Normal things, I said. You didn't mention anything weird, right? I looked at him carefully. Why would I? He relaxed slightly. The rest of the event passed in a blur of conversations and introductions. But one thing kept replaying in my head. The way Robert had watched Michael and Ashley earlier. Not angry. Just attentive. Later that night, back in the hotel room, Michael fell asleep quickly. I sat by the window looking out over the Dallas skyline. And I kept thinking about something Michael had once told me months earlier. He'd been talking about office politics. Robert hates scandals, he'd said at the time. Especially workplace affairs. He fired someone over it once. Back then, the comment didn't mean much. Now it meant everything. Because the next morning, when Michael left early for a meeting, I opened my laptop. I looked up Robert Taylor's company email. Then I stared at the screen for a long time. I wasn't planning revenge. Not exactly. But I was starting to understand something important. Michael believed his career made him untouchable. And the one person who could prove him wrong was the man he reported to every day. I didn't send an angry message. I didn't write some dramatic email exposing everything. Instead, I wrote something simple. Robert, it was nice meeting you at the reception last night. If you're ever in Nashville and need a design contact, I'd be happy to help. Jennifer Brown. That was it. Professional. Harmless. I almost didn't send it. But eventually I clicked send and closed my laptop. I didn't expect much to come from it. A few hours later, Robert replied. Nice meeting you as well, Jennifer. I'll keep that in mind. Safe travels back to Nashville. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, Michael continued traveling back and forth between Nashville and Dallas. Our house stayed quiet. We barely argued anymore. That almost made things worse. One afternoon, about a month after the reception, I received another email from Robert. Jennifer, I'll actually be in Nashville next week for a supplier meeting. If you're free, I'd enjoy continuing our conversation over dinner. I stared at the screen longer than I expected. This was the moment where things crossed a line. And I knew it. But I also remembered Michael sitting across from me at the kitchen table weeks earlier. What are you going to do, Jen? Divorce me? Good luck affording the house without me. That sentence had stayed in my head ever since. So I replied, dinner sounds fine. When Robert arrived in Nashville, we met at a quiet restaurant downtown. The atmosphere was relaxed. Dim lighting, quiet music, the kind of place people used for business conversations. At first, the conversation stayed normal. Work. Travel. The differences between Nashville and Dallas. Robert was thoughtful when he spoke, the kind of person who listened carefully before responding. Eventually, he said something that shifted the tone. Your husband is very confident about his future at the company. I gave a small smile. Yes, he talks about that a lot. Robert stirred his drink slightly. Confidence can be useful in management. He paused before adding. But sometimes it blinds people to risk. The meaning behind that sentence wasn't hard to understand. I leaned back in my chair. You're talking about Ashley. Robert didn't react with surprise. Instead, he sighed quietly. So you're aware. I've been aware for a while. He nodded slowly. The office environment has noticed. I laughed softly. I figured. Robert looked genuinely uncomfortable. For what it's worth, Jennifer, I don't approve of those situations. They complicate everything. I held his gaze. I'm sure they do. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Robert said something unexpected. Your husband believes his position protects him. That sentence felt strangely satisfying to hear out loud. Does it? I asked. Robert didn't answer immediately. Instead, he said, professional conduct matters in my department. The conversation shifted after that. We didn't spend the entire dinner discussing Michael. But the message was clear. Robert knew about the affair. And he didn't like it. Over the next couple months, Robert and I met a few more times whenever he visited Nashville. I'm not going to pretend those dinners were completely innocent. But they also weren't the dramatic revenge story people imagine. It was mostly conversation. Two adults talking. Meanwhile, Michael continued acting like his life was perfectly secure. Then one evening, everything finally started collapsing. Michael stormed into the house and slammed the front door. I looked up from the couch. What happened? His face was red with anger. HR opened an investigation today. My stomach tightened slightly. About what? You know exactly about what, he snapped. I stayed quiet. Michael started pacing across the living room. Someone reported the situation with Ashley. What situation? Don't play dumb. He stopped in front of me. Robert's been asking questions. HR got involved. So it had started. I kept my voice calm. That sounds serious. You think this is funny? He snapped. No. He ran his hands through his hair. Ashley's already being transferred to another department. And you? Michael didn't answer right away. They're reviewing my leadership evaluation. That meant the promotion he'd been talking about for years. The one he believed was guaranteed. He looked at me suddenly. You told him, didn't you? I held his gaze. Told who? Robert. The accusation hung in the room. I didn't confirm it. I didn't deny it either. Michael stared at me for a long moment. You ruined this, he said quietly. I finally stood up. No, I said. You did. The next few months passed quickly after that. Michael lost the promotion. His reputation inside the company took a serious hit. Ashley disappeared from his department entirely. And our marriage officially ended. The divorce process wasn't as dramatic as people might expect. Mostly paperwork. A few tense meetings with Edward Clark, my lawyer in Nashville. The biggest surprise came when we reviewed the house. Years earlier, when we applied for the mortgage, the bank had approved it primarily based on my credit history. Michael had never paid attention to that detail. But my banker, Linda Jones, confirmed something important. Legally, the house belonged mostly to me. Michael learned that during the settlement discussion. I'll never forget the expression on his face. The same man who once laughed and told me I'd never afford the house without him was now the one packing boxes. He moved into a small apartment in Dallas. I stayed in Nashville. As for Robert and me, that connection faded naturally once the divorce was finalized. There wasn't some dramatic ending. Just two people who understood the strange circumstances that brought them together. It's been about a year now. The house is quiet again. Sometimes I sit on the back porch in the evening and think about everything that happened. Michael still tells people I destroyed his career out of spite. Maybe part of him believes that. But the truth is simpler. He cheated. He lied. He humiliated me in front of an entire office. And he believed I would accept it because he thought I needed him. That assumption was his real mistake. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just waited. And eventually his own choices caught up with him. Still, I wonder sometimes if I crossed a line. Because even though I didn't lie about anything, I definitely helped the truth reach the right person. So, was I wrong for letting my husband's boss discover the affair knowing what it would cost him? Or was that just the consequence of his own arrogance finally catching up with him?